Hey, hey, hey. Time for another Out of This World story from rSpace. Oops, consequences actually exist. Today on rSpace, there's nothing left to say but good riddance. Fiancée cheated and expected me to pay for the wedding. I ghosted her and let her explain to the guests. I, 28 male, have been engaged to Shelley, 30 female, for over a year. Known and dated for 4 years. We were supposed to be married today, but here I am, sitting miles away, ghosting her, and writing this to strangers to feel better. Last week, my friends planned a bachelor's trip for me. It was to the countryside resort. One last hurrah with my boys before getting hitched. The day we were to leave for the trip, I had an unexplained sinking feeling in my heart. She didn't have a bachelorette. She had planned on working over the weekend to compensate for the wedding leaves. I felt guilty about leaving her alone just a weekend before the wedding. I told her I didn't want to go. Instead, I wanted to spend it with her. She convinced me it would be a bad idea to ditch the guys. At that point, she seemed right. Now I know why she sent me away. The trip was fun. It wasn't any sort of wild guys party. My friends had rented a lakeside cabin, filled the fridge with beer, and stacked the living room with enough snacks to last a month. I'm the first one to be hitched in our group. Everyone was excited. We spent the first night drinking around a bonfire, swapping stories, and making crude jokes. It was everything a bachelor weekend should be. But I couldn't shake the nagging guilt. She was home alone working while I was out here partying. The next morning, I don't know what it was, the hangover or the instinct that it became too much. Without telling anyone, I slipped out and drove home. I wanted to reach early and make dinner for her. It would be a surprise for her and maybe we could spend a quiet evening together before the chaos of wedding prep. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something odd right away. A car I didn't recognize was parked out front. Her car was tucked away in the garage like she never went out that day to work. She was supposed to be at work. What was she doing at home in the afternoon? My gut twisted, but my brain was still making excuses. Maybe a friend? A colleague? Anything but what it really was. I called her. She answered in a chipper voice. "Hey babe, how's it going?" My throat dried and I asked her, "Good, where are you?" Without missing a beat, she answered, "At work, why?" I replied, "Nothing, just checking. How's the day going?" She said, "Good, but crunched. Have a lot to wrap up before the leaves." Before I could react, she hung up saying she was in the middle of something important and love-bombing me lots of love yous and miss yous. I sat in the car numb. I didn't go through the front door. I couldn't. Something inside me, instinct maybe, told me not to. So I crept around to the backyard to the bedroom window. The curtains were drawn, but the sound spilled out was so clear. It was her whispering and giggling and a man's voice teasing or talking whatever. I froze. The kind of freeze where your heart slams so hard in your chest, you think it might burst. I wanted to believe I was hearing things, but deep down, I knew. I pulled out my phone and hit record. My hands were shivering and I was shaking standing there. Amidst the giggling, I heard her say, "I still can't believe I'm doing this here. Ugh, it's so good. I want another round." The guy chuckled and whispered something. I couldn't get it. After a few minutes of silence, I could hear her moans and it grew louder and louder until I couldn't take it. Hearing those words gutted me. I wanted to storm in, to rip the door open and catch them red-handed, but I couldn't move. It was like my body had gone numb. Instead, I slinked back to my car. I could have just walked inside and ended it, but didn't feel the need to confront. What's the point? I know the truth. I wanted to disappear and never see her face again. It was just too much for me to process. I drove back to the resort. Didn't speak a word, just drank and passed out, heavily. Anything to dull the gnawing pain in my chest. Friends dragged me to the pool, but all I did was sulk and drink. Hours passed in a blur until my close friend, Mark, pulled me to the corner and asked me what's going on. I broke, told him everything. He turned red with anger and disbelief. It was so comforting to have someone who reacted to this in the same way I did. It made it real, and that I wasn't crazy. We talked for hours. I told him I didn't want to let it pass without making her bear the consequences. He threw out some crazy ideas of revenge, and the fun part is I picked up one from it. It was clear I didn't want to see her face or confront her. All I wanted was a brutal revenge. After we checked out from the resort, he drove me back. I crashed at his place, texted her I would go home the next day. She was okay about it and responded, "Oh, I'll be heading to my parents tomorrow to stay there until the wedding. Should we meet before I leave?" I paused before replying, "Nah, let's keep the excitement alive for the big day." She agreed. No fuss, no suspicion. That night, Mark drove past my place and found the same car was still parked there. She was still on her F game. No shame, no remorse. she was having her F-partner even that night. The next afternoon, I went home. She was at work or God knows where. The bedroom looked so clean. No one could ever suspect what happened there last day. I felt so disgusted that I couldn't even look at my bed. I slept on the couch for the remaining days until the wedding. I played my part perfectly. Sweet texts, excitement about the wedding. On the surface, nothing was wrong, but inside, I was done. Completely checked out. I felt evil from the inside, but so was she. On the wedding morning, she arrived at the venue with her entourage or bridesmaids, makeup artists, and family, posting stories and snap streaks. I told her I was going to pick up my grandmother from the airport and would be slightly late. I stayed in touch with her right up until the last moment, playing the part. But instead of donning a tux, I packed my bags, locked up the house, and drove to my grandmother's place, states away. I turned off my phone and, for the first time in days, breathed. Before I disappeared completely, I sent out an email to my side of the guests. My family, close friends, and colleagues. I laid it all out. The cheating, the lies, how I found out. I informed them that the wedding stands canceled and they shouldn't bother texting, calling me, or Shelley about it. I left out our mutual friends. Some of them should know Shelley's version, right? My parents still called me in concern. I told them in brief, but not about my plan. Only my grandmother knew about it. I had called her the previous night, asking her not to travel to the wedding. Then, I cut the cord, switched off my phone. Mark said he would attend the wedding and see what happens and update me. He knows I'm at my grandmother's. He called me sometime back, but I don't think I'm ready to listen. I'm feeling numb and suffocated. I don't want to talk to anybody. Have a lot to say, but can't type anymore. We'll make another update soon. I love how Shelley really thought she was running the show, but honestly, why go through with the wedding and marriage still? What was her endgame? Did she think this was just a little pre-wedding fun before settling down? Or was she planning to just keep this going on the side of hope you'd never notice? It's the level of delusion for me. Update 1. Spoke to Mark. He updated me in detail. The wedding day was chaos. It was smooth until the guests started asking about my family and the groom. She tried calling me over and over. When I didn't answer, she called my parents. No response. She called Mark, who was at the venue, and pretended to not know anything. Her parents turned her into full-blown questions. Where's the groom? Is this some kind of prank? Did something happen? Her bridesmaids tried to keep things together, forcing smiles, but the vibe got thick. Guests huddled in small groups, speculating and gossiping and making all sorts of stories under the sun. One of them being I ran away with my colleague. This one was speculated by her godmother. Eventually, her father took the stage and requested everyone to be patient, saying, "We're expecting a bit of a delay. Please bear with us." He was shaky and pale. It didn't help. The guests weren't blind. They knew something was very wrong. She and friends eventually realized that none of my guests arrived and all of it seemed planned. They tried to corner Mark, but Shelley stopped them, and maybe she feared Mark would spill the beans in front of the guests. Eventually, her parents and friends sneaked her out of the venue, and one of her bridesmaids announced that the wedding was postponed and everyone would be notified about the next date soon. This isn't even the worst part. She wasn't just dealing with the emotional wreckage of being humiliated in front of her family, friends, and an entire wedding venue full of guests. No, this was hitting her where it hurt the most, her wallet. Actually, Shelley had lost a stable job a few months before the wedding. After months of struggle, she settled for a low-paying job which paid her project-wise. She barely makes enough to pay her bills. I covered most of the household expenses. At the time, I didn't think much of it. We had already planned everything, and since I could afford it, I volunteered to cover the wedding expenses without hesitation. I believed we were a team, and in a marriage, it shouldn't matter who was paying, as long as we were in it together. That belief shattered the moment I discovered her cheating. The moment I pulled the plug on our relationship, I wasn't about to let my hard-earned money pay for a celebration of lies. For the wedding, we had hired a planner, and they did everything, including the venue, decor, and food. We had paid only 40% of the cost in advance. The remaining 60% was due. In fact, 30% of it was to be paid 2 days before the wedding, which I had conveniently stalled. When the manager reached out, I said we'll settle everything after the wedding. He informed me that an additional interest would be charged on this 30% due to the delay. I said sure, it wasn't my problem anymore. I knew I would vanish and she would have to deal with it. It happened as I planned. When Shelley was trying to sneak out of the venue to escape the judgment of the guests, she was stopped by the planning team. The manager wasn't about to let her walk without settling the dues. It was 60% of the total wedding cost, and let me tell you, it was huge. Big deal for someone who doesn't have a stable job and blew off her savings on the wedding dress, makeup, bridesmaid costumes, and gifts. The manager insisted on settling it right away. She didn't have enough money to cover on the spot. Her father was forced to step in, but even for him, the amount was too much to pay at a go. He desperately pleaded for time, but the manager wasn't in a charitable mood. He refused to budge until some form of guarantee was provided. After a lot of pleadings, he let go of Shelley and her mother, but they made her father sit until a new contract was drawn up. He signed to take full responsibility. If the dues weren't cleared within the agreed time frame, legal action would be taken. The humiliation of having to sign those papers in front of so many people was unbearable for him. Though most of their guests had left, a few were still present to witness the chaos. He was seething with anger, cursing me loud. By then, Mark had already shown my email to most of the guests, and almost everyone there knew the truth, but her parents still believed that I stood her up. After dealing with the planner, her father stormed over to my parents' house. He was boiling with anger and ready for a fight. He was met with a cold reception. My mother informed him about her cheating. He was ashamed, but still mad at me for dragging him into this. He said I should have informed them as well so that they too would have skipped the wedding. He was like, I should have handled the situation behind closed doors and not made a public fool of the family. My mother gave him back that there was no one to blame but his daughter. She had destroyed everything, not me. She chose lust over her loyalty. He should be schooling his daughter instead of lecturing me. He left with a bitter face. Shelley went back home with her mom and friends only to find my side of the closet empty. My things were gone. The realization must have hit her like a truck. Everything was over, and I had made sure she knew exactly why. On the fridge, in bold black ink, I left a note. I know about your cheating. Next to it were printed photos of affair partner's car parked in our driveway. I'm sure her parents and friends didn't take it well. I don't know what exactly happened between them, but some of our mutual friends eventually reached out to me expressing how sorry they were for how things turned out. Through them, I got to know that her parents have also turned their backs on her. She had to move out of that house. She couldn't afford the rent. Initially, they had planned to take her in until she got back on her feet. But once they learned of her cheating, they pulled back on their support. Her father was saddled with wedding debt and furious beyond words. He demanded that she pay back every cent he had covered for the wedding. Not only was she left alone to face the consequences of her actions, but now she was financially crippled as well. Right now, she's couch surfing with one of her friends. I couldn't care less. I have moved in with Mark for now until I find my own place. Update 2. It's been over 4 months since the D-Day. She has been chasing me for closure, or so she claimed. She tried everything, calling me from different numbers, reaching out through mutual friends, and even sending letters to my parents' house. None of it worked. I didn't reply. I didn't owe her anything. I had blocked her from everywhere, erased her from my life like she never existed. But she was relentless. Her final attempt came as an email. The subject line, "One last meeting for closure. Please, please, please." I almost deleted it without reading. Curiosity got the better of me, and I read it. It was long and desperate, with pleadings and apologies, and a request to meet in person, just once. She promised no drama, no manipulation, just a chance to explain herself and get some kind of peace. I wasn't sure if I cared about her closure, but a part of me wanted to hear what she had to say. Not for her sake, but for mine. I stalled it for months and left her hanging, let her simmer in her own mess. Then finally, I agreed to meet at a cafe. Neutral ground, public, no room for drama. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting in a corner looking different. Not the competent, put-together woman she once was. She looked drained, hollow, dark circles under her eyes, fidgety hands, tense posture. Good, she deserved it. The moment she saw me, her face lit up with something almost hopeful. Almost. But I wasn't there to offer her hope. I sat down and didn't say a word. Just waited. Let her speak first. She sighed and launched right into it. No small talk, no pretense. Straight to the point. She confessed, told me everything. According to her, it wasn't an affair. She swore up and down that she hadn't been emotionally involved with the guy. That it was a one-time thing. That she had never cheated before. That she only did it because she wanted one last night to explore her fantasies before settling into permanent monogamy. She said, "Just one day for myself. I wanted to get it out of my system before committing fully to you." The guy was a former colleague who had a reputation for being good in bed. She murmured, "I heard he was good, experienced. There was a rumor at work that he did it to our manager, and she was so impressed that he got a promotion. Not only that, he had been servicing some other top seniors in the company, female ones. I texted him asking if all these were true. He hinted he was good at his work. Didn't do it for money, but pleasure, and no strings attached." And that's all she wanted. One night of purely physical pleasure. A transactional experience, nothing more. She claimed she never planned on doing it again and never intended to hurt me. I sat there feeling disgusted and dirty. She was the one who did that stuff, yet I was feeling dirty. She was still talking. I zoned out, thinking about what all she would have made him do. She was saying something when I interrupted her and asked, "What all did you make him do?" She was astonished. I repeated, "Tell me, what was your fantasy? Tell me in detail. How did you instruct him to do you? Did you text, email him your requirements prior? Show me. Did you direct him during the act? How did it happen? Tell me." I didn't realize my voice was rising. She begged me to stop and asserted, "I won't say, for God's sake, stop," and started howling. After a minute of silence, she said she regretted it the moment I called her to check. She said her heart dropped, and she knew she had ruined everything. But instead of coming clean, she panicked and lied that she was at work, tried to pretend it never happened. She thought she could move past it, that I would never know. But I did, and her world collapsed. Then came the gaslighting. She said, "If you discovered it, you could have just walked inside and ended it right there, but you chose the deceptive way to hunt me down. You played along for a week to humiliate me in front of everyone. My parents were humiliated and traumatized. You could have handled it privately. You should have been a man and confronted me instead of running away." But then she did a complete 180. "Still, I can forgive you if you can forget what happened, and we can start it over." I almost laughed. She actually said that she was willing to forgive me for what I did to her, that we both made mistakes, that we should just call it even, move on, and maybe even start fresh. She whispered, "I still love you. I know you too. We can fix this." And then came the cherry on top. She offered to pay me back the 40% I had spent on the wedding. She was like, "I know you paid 40% up front and the remaining Dad covered. I'm going to pay back Dad as soon as I can. If this helps, I can pay you as well your 40%. She said in a way as if money was ever the issue, as if that could erase everything. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I laughed, a deep, bitter laugh that wiped whatever hope she had left from her face. I leaned in slightly and said, "You think I want your money? You think this was about a dang refund? You made your choices, and now you're living with the consequences. This isn't about revenge anymore. This is just what you reap. And I didn't do anything wrong. Why should I resolve it privately when you opened your legs to a stranger? You're a whore and everyone needs to know that." That's when she broke, full on sobbing, right there in the cafe. People started staring, but I didn't care. Did she want closure? She got it. She sobbed and choked and admitted that she had nothing left. No job, no real friends, no family. Her so-called friends, the ones who were cheering her on behind my back, started distancing themselves. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who was publicly abandoned on her wedding day. Some even threw her under the bus and leaked screenshots of past conversations where she had bragged about how easily she could play me. It all came full circle, and the karma was brutal. Everyone turned their backs on her. She was lonely. People whispered about her wherever she went. She was the girl who got stood up at her wedding, the girl whose fiancé exposed her cheating. She had lost everything. I stood up saying, "Good, now you know how I felt," and I walked away. Left her sitting there broken. I didn't look back. I'm hopeful of moving forward with my life in a much better and happier way. This wasn't a one-time slip-up. It was a deliberate decision, planned out, executed, and then buried until it blew up in her face. And now she wants closure? Closure for what? She got exactly what she signed up for. Have you ever exposed a cheater publicly? How did you do it? Share your experience with us in the comments below. And thank you for joining us today on rSpace. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Until next time.